28 seconds. That was how long it took for a $900 million merger to begin falling apart. Not because of the market, not because of regulators, but because the chairman's daughter stood up in the middle of a strategy meeting and tried to remove the one person who understood how the entire deal actually worked. 30 seconds earlier the room had been quiet, controlled, predictable. Executives were reviewing the integration timeline for the merger between Orion Logistics and Crestline Global, a transaction that had taken nearly 2 years to negotiate and another 8 months to structure. My name is Adrian Mercer. I'm 46 years old, and for the past 17 years I've worked inside Orion Logistics designing operational systems that allow very large companies to scale without collapsing under their own complexity. My job rarely involves headlines. If everything works, people like me remain invisible. But when something inside the system breaks, suddenly everyone remembers who built the structure holding the company together. That morning we were reviewing compliance sequencing when the conference room doors opened and Cassandra Hale walked in 10 minutes late. 2 things about Cassandra were immediately obvious. First, she was 23. Second, she walked into rooms as if she had inherited them along with the company. Behind her stood Victor Lang, the chairman's chief advisor, the executive responsible for guiding Cassandra while she learned the business. Cassandra dropped into her chair and skimmed the executive summary for less than 15 seconds before tapping the page with a manicured finger. "This integration schedule is too cautious," she said casually. "Move the merger announcement forward by 1 quarter. I looked up from the documents in front of me. "That violates the regulatory review sequence," I said. "The compliance audit isn't finished." Cassandra leaned back as if the answer had bored her. "Then finish it faster." "That's not how regulatory approval works," I replied calmly. A thin smile crossed her face. "It will when I'm running the company." Several executives shifted in their seats but no one spoke. Cassandra looked around the table and then shrugged. "If he won't support the new timeline," she said, nodding in my direction, "remove him from the integration project." The room went completely still. Then she added something that changed the atmosphere entirely. "If necessary, security can escort him out." Across the table Chairman Daniel Hale straightened slowly in his chair. "Cassandra," he said quietly, "that's not how we handle disagreements." But no one else in the room spoke. And inside corporate boardroom silence can be more dangerous than conflict because silence means people are waiting to see who actually has power. What Cassandra Hale didn't understand yet was something very simple. The $900 million merger didn't move forward because someone signed a document. It moved forward because investors trusted the operational framework behind it, a framework I had personally designed. Cassandra joined Orion Logistics 6 months earlier. The announcement came during a quarterly leadership meeting. Chairman Hale stood at the front of the room and cleared his throat. "My daughter Cassandra will be joining Orion to learn the business," he said. "She'll rotate through departments and start from the ground up." From the ground up, that was the phrase. Within 3 weeks Cassandra had an office larger than most department heads. Within 5 weeks she had a title no one had held before, Strategic Integration Director. Titles like that sound harmless until someone starts using them. Cassandra wasn't unintelligent. She understood financial summaries quickly and she liked aggressive growth strategies. The problem wasn't intelligence. The problem was patience. During one early planning session she tapped a supply forecast on the table. "These numbers are too conservative," she said. "Increase the projections." "They match our distribution capacity," I replied. "If we inflate them we miss delivery targets." Cassandra shrugged. "Then fix the distribution network." I looked at her for a moment. "That takes years." "Not when you have authority," she said quietly. That became the pattern. Cassandra pushed risky ideas. I corrected them quietly before they reached investors. She bypassed operational review. I routed decisions back through compliance. For months I told myself I was protecting the company. What I didn't realize was that someone else had been protecting Cassandra. Victor Lang. Officially Victor was the chairman's strategic advisor. Unofficially, he was the executive responsible for smoothing Cassandra's mistakes before they reached Daniel Hale. Whenever Cassandra crossed a line, Victor stepped in quietly, not to challenge her, to repair the damage, which meant the chairman saw a very different version of his daughter's performance. Cassandra saw something else entirely. One afternoon after a meeting, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with quiet curiosity. "You know this company will be mine one day," she said casually. Her voice carried no doubt. Because when someone grows up surrounded by people quietly fixing their mistakes, they eventually stop believing mistakes exist. And when a person has never heard the word no, they begin to believe power is something they were born with. Cassandra's order in the conference room should have triggered a debate. Instead, it triggered silence. Within 24 hours, I began noticing changes. 2 meetings disappeared from my calendar. One member of my integration team was reassigned. And when I tried to open the merger documentation later that afternoon, my system access had been restricted. That was the moment I understood Cassandra's strategy. She wasn't trying to remove me loudly. She was trying to erase me quietly. I ran into Victor Lang outside the strategy office that evening. "System issue?" I asked, nodding toward the access restriction notice on my tablet. Victor gave a polite smile. "Temporary restructuring," he said. "Cassandra wants a more agile integration structure." Agile, corporate language for breaking things faster than people can fix them. "And my team?" I asked. "Still involved," Victor replied smoothly, "just under different supervision." Across the hallway, executives walked past the glass walls pretending not to hear the conversation. Everyone had heard what happened in the meeting. Everyone knew Cassandra had tried to remove me, but no one wanted to challenge the chairman's daughter. That night I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Archive. For years I had kept records of operational directives, approval logs, compliance reviews, and executive communications. Large deals leave paper trails, and when systems start breaking, memory becomes unreliable. Documents don't. I began organizing the timeline. Cassandra's directives, the reporting changes, the compliance stages she wanted skipped, and the instruction that had started everything: move the merger forward 1 quarter. Cassandra Hale had never bothered to read the investor agreement, which meant the people who actually understood that deal were about to start asking questions. 30 minutes after my access restrictions appeared, my phone rang. "Mr. Mercer," the chairman's assistant said carefully. "Mr. Hale would like to see you." Of course he would. Daniel Hale's office overlooked most of the city skyline. When I stepped inside, he stood behind his desk studying a document while Victor Lang remained near the window. I recognized the document immediately: an internal reassignment memo. Corporate language designed to turn controversial decisions into procedural ones. The chairman cleared his throat. "Adrian, given the tension surrounding the integration project, we may need to temporarily adjust leadership responsibilities." He never said remove. Executives rarely do. They prefer softer words like restructure. I let the silence stretch before speaking. "You can remove me from the project if you want," I said calmly. Both men looked up, but the investors funding the merger might reconsider releasing the capital if that happens. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Daniel Hale lowered the document. Victor Lang straightened. "What exactly are you implying?" the chairman asked slowly. "I'm saying the merger doesn't move forward because someone signs an HR memo," I replied. "It moves forward because the investors trust the operational framework supporting it." Victor frowned slightly. And the person who designed that framework is standing in front of you." The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. Daniel Hale studied me carefully. "If the architect of that system is removed immediately after raising a compliance concern," I continued calmly, "the investors have the right to review whether governance around the deal has become unstable." Victor understood immediately. Daniel Hale spoke slowly, "Meaning they could pause the funding." "Exactly." The reassignment memo suddenly looked far less useful because this conversation was no longer about removing an employee. It was about whether Orion Logistics had just placed a $900 million merger at risk, and investors rarely remain patient when corporate governance starts looking unstable. The message from the investor consortium arrived the following morning at exactly 9:12 a.m., and unlike the quiet political maneuvering that had been unfolding inside Orion Logistics, the message itself was precise, direct, and impossible to misinterpret. 3 short paragraphs appeared in the inbox of every senior executive connected to the merger project. No dramatic accusations, no emotional language, just a formal notice stating that pending clarification regarding governance stability and operational oversight continuity, capital authorization for the Orion Crestline merger would be temporarily frozen. In practical terms, that meant one thing. The $900 million supporting the entire transaction had stopped moving. The change in atmosphere inside the building was immediate. Phones began ringing across the finance floor. Analysts who had spent months modeling expansion scenarios suddenly found themselves recalculating risk exposure. Treasury teams walked between offices carrying printed documents as if the numbers on them might change mid-stride. No one said the word panic, but the tension was unmistakable. Deals that size do not freeze because of rumors. They freeze when investors begin questioning whether the people running the company actually understand the systems they are responsible for protecting. Upstairs on the executive level, the reaction was far less controlled. Cassandra Hale stormed directly into Victor Lang's office without knocking. "You told me this situation was handled," she said sharply. Victor remained seated behind his desk, fingers folded together, studying the printed notice in front of him. "Fix it," Cassandra demanded. For the past 6 months, Victor had been the person who quietly repaired Cassandra's mistakes. He had rewritten reports before they reached the chairman, softened language before it reached investors, and redirected responsibility whenever Cassandra pushed too far. But this time the problem had traveled outside the building. Victor looked up slowly. "I can't," he said. Cassandra stared at him, clearly expecting a longer explanation. Victor simply slid the lender notice across the desk. Cassandra read the message quickly, then tossed the page aside with visible frustration. "They're overreacting," she said. "Tell them the leadership structure hasn't changed." Victor didn't move. "It has," he replied quietly, "because the person responsible for the operational framework has been removed." Cassandra crossed her arms. "Then we replace him." Victor shook his head once. "You don't understand the clause in the investor agreement." He reached for another document and turned it toward her. Buried inside the merger contract was a governance provision tied directly to the operational architecture supporting the deal. The clause did not mention my name. It didn't need to. Instead, it referenced the architect responsible for designing and maintaining the reporting structure that ensured regulatory compliance across both companies. Under ordinary circumstances, if that role changed, investors would simply be notified. But the clause included an additional safeguard. If the architect of the framework was removed immediately after raising a compliance concern, the investors had the right to review whether the company's governance structure had become unstable. Cassandra stared at the page as the implications slowly settled in. "That's ridiculous," she said finally. "It's standard," Victor replied. "It's designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation." Down the hallway, the chairman's office door opened and Daniel Hale stepped out, holding the same lender notice. For the first time since Cassandra had joined the company, the chairman did not look confident. By early afternoon, the board of directors had been notified and an emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening. There was no press release and no public announcement, just a quiet message sent to each director asking them to attend an urgent session on the 31st floor. When I arrived, the long conference table was already half full. At the head of the table sat Margaret Sloan, the lead independent director temporarily chairing the session. Daniel Hale sat beside her, looking noticeably older than he had the previous day. Cassandra sat across from me with visible irritation, tapping her fingers against the table as if the entire meeting were a waste of time. Victor Lang remained silent near the end of the table. The company's general counsel began presenting the timeline. The strategy meeting, Cassandra's directive to accelerate the merger announcement, my objection regarding regulatory sequencing, and finally Cassandra's instruction to remove me from the integration project. Every detail was supported by emails, timestamps, and internal communication logs. The presentation contained no accusations, just facts. When it ended, Margaret Sloan folded her hands and looked slowly around the room. Before anyone could speak, another document appeared on the screen behind her. A short message from the lead investor group funding the merger. The room read the sentence in silence. Please clarify why the architect of the operational framework was removed immediately after raising a governance risk. Cassandra let out a sharp laugh. This is absurd, she said. He's exaggerating everything to protect his job. No one responded. Cassandra leaned forward. The merger will move forward whether he's involved or not. Margaret Sloan studied her for several seconds before answering. This is not a personal disagreement, she said calmly. This is a governance issue. The phrase carried weight inside boardrooms because governance failures trigger investor scrutiny, regulatory attention, and sometimes shareholder lawsuits. Margaret turned toward Daniel Hale. Were you aware of your daughter's directive during the meeting? The chairman hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Several directors exchanged quiet looks across the table. Cassandra looked from face to face, clearly realizing for the first time that the room was no longer automatically on her side. Margaret Sloane spoke again. When a compliance concern is raised during a transaction of this scale, she said carefully, the appropriate response is review, not retaliation. Cassandra started to respond, but Margaret raised a hand. We are not debating personalities, she continued. We are reviewing fiduciary responsibility. The board deliberated privately for nearly 2 hours while the executives waited outside the conference room. When the doors finally reopened, the atmosphere had changed. Margaret Sloane stepped forward holding a printed document. The board has reached a preliminary decision, she announced. Until the governance review is complete, Cassandra Hale is suspended from all operational authority related to the Orion Crestline merger. Cassandra's expression shifted instantly from irritation to disbelief. You can't be serious, she said. Margaret's voice remained calm. The investors funding this transaction require stability. At the moment they do not see it. Cassandra looked toward her father expecting him to intervene, but Daniel Hale remained silent. 2 days later the board released its final decision through a formal internal announcement distributed to every senior executive in the company. The message was concise but decisive. The board had concluded that recent leadership actions had exposed Orion Logistics to unacceptable fiduciary risk. The first name listed in the announcement was Cassandra Hale. Her directive to remove operational leadership after a compliance objection was described as an abuse of authority incompatible with corporate governance standards. Effective immediately, Cassandra Hale was removed from all executive responsibilities within the company. The second name surprised no one but still carried enormous weight. Daniel Hale. The board concluded that he had failed to intervene during the incident and later attempted to contain the situation rather than correct it. His resignation as chairman was requested and accepted the same afternoon. But the announcement contained one additional decision that many executives had not expected. Victor Lang. For months he had quietly repaired Cassandra's mistakes, preserving the illusion that the system was functioning normally. The board described his role differently, enabling leadership failure. Victor Lang's position as senior advisor was terminated effective immediately. 3 months later, Orion Logistics looked almost identical from the outside. The same headquarters tower, the same company name above the entrance, the same executives walking through the lobby each morning, but the structure inside had changed. The board introduced several reforms during the governance review. Executive override procedures were rewritten to ensure that operational objections could not be ignored without formal documentation. Oversight committees were expanded, and a new anti-nepotism policy required independent board approval before any family member could hold a leadership role. Once those reforms were in place, the investor consortium lifted the freeze on the merger. The $900 million transaction moved forward again. A few weeks later, the board asked me to oversee strategic integration for the combined company. The role was not presented as a reward. It was presented as stability. One afternoon, a young analyst stopped me near the elevator. How did you stay calm during everything that happened? She asked quietly. I thought about the meeting, the silence in the room, and the moment Cassandra told security to escort me out. I wasn't calm, I replied. I was prepared. Later that evening, I walked past the same conference room where the entire situation had started. The chairs were arranged exactly the same way as before, but one seat at the table was empty. Because power inside large companies rarely collapses because of enemies. It collapses when too many people become comfortable saying yes to the wrong person. And this time someone finally said no.